What is going on, everybody? Welcome to another Angle of Pursuit podcast, your fantasy football home over at fakepigskin.com. I'm your host, Kyle Robert. You can follow me on Twitter at NotoriousKRO. With me tonight from the East Coast is Damian Dabrowski. What's up, Damian?
Christmas Eve, right, Kyle? This is what it is
Absolutely.
right now. The night before, it's fun. It's a fun time to be here. Like I said, it's tough with the kind of the crossover, fighting for baseball championships while trying to get off to a good start in football. But it's been a long time coming. I'm happy we're here. It's kind of a lot of anxiety now, but it's gonna be good. Being a Pats fan, I can't wait for tomorrow. For tomorrow night, we're gonna have all the Goodell clown towels in full force. So it's going to be a good time, and it's going to make Sunday better because I'm going to be able to just go full in on red zone, not have to worry about the Pats, have that out of the way. So countdown's going.
Absolutely. So what's your typical setup on a Sunday? Do you have multiple screens? Do you have your laptop out? Are you tracking certain leagues? Like, kind of what's your go-to Sunday plan for football?
So I got a couple of buddies that I usually get together with, and we just have red zone on the big TV, and then usually I'll get two computers going. I got a little Chromebook that I'll kind of have. If I'm really interested in one game, if the Pats are playing, I'll pull up a stream on there. And then on kind of my Mac, I'll have a lot of the matchups going, and I'll have Twitter open. Or a lot of times I'll just have Twitter on my phone. So, it's a lot of stuff going on at once, but it's really just one TV, which I think helps. I've done like the couple TV setup. And it's just hard to kind of pay attention sometimes when you have all that going. But I'm trying out something new this year. I haven't actually looked at any of my matchups, and I don't think I'm going to in terms of who my opponent is playing, even before the game and then even during the game. Like I'll pay attention to my team, but I'm just not going to look at it because it's just in the past it's just too much, especially when you have. I mean, I think I'm going to have somewhere around 14 leagues this year. Granted, there's some MFLs in there, so it's probably only 8 or so that are, like active in season management. But when you have that many teams going, every single player is pretty much influencing you in one way or another. So it's hard enough to follow all the guys I have. I don't want to worry about trying to root against the people I'm playing against too.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in 12 leagues where I set lineups, and probably another, I don't know, 10, 8 or 10 MFLs, so probably around 20 leagues total. But yeah, it's madness to try and track all those teams. I have my home league that I've been doing. We're coming up on 10 years, and then I have another one that's different iteration of that league, and those are the leagues that I'm paying attention to. Those are the leagues I'm watching. Kind of have the scores up on my laptop. I do that multiple TV setup you were kind of avoiding, Damien. I have 3 TVs going. I usually have like my Titans on the main TV, the other big game on one of the smaller TVs, and then usually Red Zone on the third TV, depending on the setup. And then usually here on the West Coast in the afternoon, there's only three or four games going, so I can usually get all 3 of them kind of on and paying attention. It's just the beautiful part about football is it's a constant go 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 stop. All right, huddle up, stand around. So I just bounce from one TV to the other because there's usually one TV where there's something happening, and then the other 2 there's just kind of standing around or it's commercial or whatever. So I can usually kind of see everything I need to see. Obviously, between DirecTV's kind of shortened version and the NFL Game Pass, that makes things a lot easier to kind of go back and make sure you didn't miss out on anything. Obviously, have Twitter open to make sure all the injuries, all the news, all that good stuff. But yeah, I'm very excited for tomorrow, and I'm going to be in Las Vegas for Week 1. I cannot wait. I will be in the sports book making all the bets, and and hopefully not losing.
sounds sounds like a profitable strategy.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, all the bets, just going to see what I can do. But let's jump into it. There's a lot to talk about. We'll start with the Dolphins and Bucks. Obviously, the hurricane is heading into Florida, and they're going to cancel that game, which was supposed to be Week 1. It's now going to be Week 11 when both teams had a bye. So that I guess talk to me about your kind of your initial thoughts. Talk to me about playing 16 straight games, and if you're annoyed, if you're an Evans owner, if you're a Jay owner, or if you're kind of makes things easier once Week 11 rolls around.
I mean, I think from a fantasy perspective, it probably does make things a little bit easier, actually, just because obviously we have no other teams on bye week one. So it's a little bit easier to work around, not having those guys that you mentioned available, and it's going to come back to help you. In week 11, you're probably going to have a more critical matchup than you are in week one. And if you own those guys, you're obviously going to have other players on bye that week probably. So it's going to be nice to kind of get some of it back there. From a football perspective, I guess we don't really have much to go on here. And again, it's such a case by case basis. I mean, we don't know what type of injury issues the Bucs are going to have this year. Obviously, if they have key guys banged up, then having to play 16 straight weeks is not going to be ideal. But if they're one of the teams that are fortunate enough to stay relatively healthy, then it probably won't have an impact. It's obviously maybe better to kind of get that break in the middle of the season once your body has kind of taken some punishment, as opposed to now when most of the starters haven't really been playing too much in preseason anyway. So it's not like they need that extra week. So from that perspective, maybe it's not the best thing, but I don't think there's really a way for us to kind of know what type of tangible effect it's going to have. I don't see, from an actual football perspective, it's certainly not going to be a good thing, but I just don't think we have enough to say it's going to be a bad thing.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. It will be worth monitoring kind of some of these injury-prone guys. With the Zeke news of Zeke playing week one, if you had Jacquizz Rodgers as kind of one of your fallback plans, now you can play him basically week 2, week 3, week 4, and kind of finagle an extra week out of Rodgers. So that kind of helps. But yeah, I mean, there's not a lot to go off of. Obviously, if you took Evans, you took Ajayi, Devontae Parker, Jarvis Landry, like you're gonna have to go to the bench a little bit sooner than you thought. Hopefully you have enough options. You drafted well enough where it's not going to be a tremendous, ordeal to kind of make it work. Damian, if you one of your league mates has one of these guys that isn't playing, are you trying to throw out maybe a little bit of an undersell as a term of an offer and maybe get a bargain? Maybe you wanted Evans and he went 3 picks before you, but you can throw him a receiver that, is fine, but you like Evans a lot more. Is that a trade you're trying to make, or do you think, it's a 1 week thing and no one's really going to just give him away?
I don't think you're going to get, Evans or really, Ajayi, any of those higher end guys at really a discount. Because like I said, I do think there's going to be a benefit later in the season for those owners. You mentioned, Jacquizz Rodgers, and I think the biggest takeaway here in terms of how this affects planning really is going to be Jacquizz and Doug Martin. Obviously it's a number of games, not a number of weeks that they're suspended in Martin's case. But I think the issue is that now it gets pushed back a week. So, you're not going to have Doug Martin until week 5 as opposed to getting him back in week 4. And you're not going to have Jacquizz until next week to use. And I think a lot of teams, drafted Jacquizz in cases where they basically had, maybe not a lot of great running back depth, but the hope that some of those guys would basically, pop after a couple of games, and they could use Jacquizz for those first couple of games. And then once those guys took on bigger roles, they could swap them out, once Martin came back. And I think those are the owners that are going to be in tough situations here, obviously, because they might not have that week 1 starter ready to go to replace what they thought would be, Jacquizz's spot on their roster. So I think maybe that's a case where you might be able to offer, somebody who, I mean, these are 2 guys we mentioned, but for instance, Rob Kelly or Jonathan Stewart, players that we think, with time should basically cede their roles to younger, more talented players. But at least at the start of the season, they are kind of the preferred back, the goal line back, the back that's going to get a substantial amount of touches. So you might be able to do something there where you can, if you have the depth, you can trade one of those guys for maybe a piece that's going to be more valuable later on. But that's really kind of the only extent I can see in terms of an impact that this is going to have on trade negotiations this early in the season. And you got to consider that I think most owners are going to be reluctant to make a deal this soon. They obviously drafted, with a team they like at least, and it's hard to change that, without having any games played yet.
Yeah, 100%. It usually takes, a good 3-4 weeks before teams really start to come together and people kind of figure out what they like, what they don't. Let me ask you your general philosophy. Tonight we're going to talk. Basically, every Wednesday, we're going to help you get ready for the week. We're going to talk about our starts of the week. We're going to talk about our sits of the week. We're going to talk about, and we're going to go position by position and give you a name to target and a name we're going to avoid. And but in general, Damian, are you looking to start your studs no matter what? Are you kind of looking and taking the matchup into effect a little bit? Like, kind of what's your general philosophy when setting lineups?
I think week one, I lean more towards starting your studs and not factoring matchups as much, mainly because we just don't know what teams are going to look like yet. We know what they look like on paper, but really, the only data we have is how they performed last year. If it's a case where much of the starting defense is the same for that team, then I guess we can kind of likely assume that they're going to perform similarly. But a lot of teams have so much turnover in the offseason that I want to see them play before I identify them as a problematic matchup for somebody I have. That said, I think it's a little bit different in terms of offense. I think with some of these quarterback situations we have, I don't need to see Blake Bortles or Tom Savage or Scott Tolzien play to know that they're not good. So, I'm fine downgrading players on those offenses, for instance, because of the quarterback situation. But I'm not doing it so much based on opponents.
Yeah, I think that's completely fair. I'm being precautious a little bit, but for the most part, if I drafted somebody high, they're gonna probably find a spot in my lineup because I'd rather start Le'Veon Bell in a tough matchup and have him, not go off, than put him on my bench trying to get too cute, and then he ends up having a 3-touchdown game, and then I'm kicking myself all week. So start your studs, especially early in the season, and obviously you can make adjustments as we go. Things look like they're going to be different, but for now, start your studs. But what about the Colts though? Because we mentioned, me and Ron talked about it. Obviously, Andrew Luck isn't playing. Ryan Kelly isn't playing. Are you playing Indianapolis Colts this week?
No, absolutely none. And I don't have a single share of anybody on that offense. I'm pretty confident that like I said, I have a lot of leagues, but I was pretty intent on kind of going in with that strategy in drafts, just because I'm not gonna. We won't know what the deal with Luck is gonna be, but I just didn't want to risk being in a situation where he doesn't play for 6 weeks, and I drafted T.Y. Hilton in the third round, and now I have a receiver that is getting me 35 yards a game because he doesn't have a quarterback. So between that and Frank Gore, being 55, and Dante Moncrief, not being able to play 3 games in a row without getting hurt. I guess there is a world where this all comes together, and they're the Colts that I guess we expected before all this news came. But I just don't see it. I just don't want to deal with that headache starting in week one. There's going to be enough problems that arise as the season goes on that you don't kind of want to start going uphill before a game's even been played.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you. I don't have any Colts. I had no Luck shares, no Hilton shares, no Moncrief shares. Maybe that comes back to bite us in the butt over the second half, but I'm not stressing about it now. The one thing I will say is, if there's still time, today is the last day. Head over to playdraft.com/fakepigskin or download the Draft app from the iTunes store, from the Google Play Store. Add the promo code FakePigskin. Deposit $5, get a year of Fake Pigskin Elite, get an extra $3 ticket. Guys, we have DFS coming up. Damian is going to write an article that you guys should be checking out each and every week on Fake Pigskin. This week it will be free. Starting next week, you will need that Fake Pigskin Elite membership. So sign up, get extra $3, get Damian's article. It's the best. You can still do best ball drafts. No injury worries, no waiver wires. If your stud gets hurt, he plays the best player for you. It'll also have DFS. It's a unique take on DFS, and I kind of like it, where Damian, instead of basically, where on DraftKings or FanDuel you do the salary, only one person can have Le'Veon Bell this week. Only one person can have Tom Brady. Only one person can have Travis Kelce. So you'll be able to tell people, hey, avoid this guy who, or if you miss out on Brady, grab this quarterback, grab this receiver, and kind of fill out your lineup, because you're still trying to get the best lineup. So it's a unique twist and a fun way to play. And, check out Damian's article each and every week on Fake Pigskin and have a lot of fun playing DFS.
I do think that's a good point, Kyle. Kind of the unique spin that this throws into the format, because especially for if you're somebody who is just kind of getting into DFS and isn't DraftKings and FanDuel, they're great. I love playing on those sites, but it's a lot. It takes a while to kind of get accustomed to all that's on there. And given how popular those sites have gotten and kind of the volume that's on there, it takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of research to be competitive, even in the lower volume tournaments. And having this, with play draft, where, like you said, because it's a snake draft format, only one person in each mini league can own a player. It does make it a lot easier, in terms of at least following your team, rooting for your team throughout the day, because so many times on DraftKings, you'll put together a solid team, but if you're really trying to win tournaments, things like that, you have to worry so much about the projected ownership for so many players, because it doesn't really matter if you pick a great lineup if everybody else has those same players in their lineup, and then it's going to come down to the one or two spots that didn't do great for you, and that's what's going to keep you out of the money. So knowing that if you're confident in a few guys and you're able to get them, nobody else is going to have them in your league, it is going to make that a little bit more enjoyable kind of as you're going through the games on Sunday.
100%. All right, Damian, let's jump into it. Let's talk about our week 1 studs, and we'll start at quarterback. If you've read Fake Pigskin this week, I think you might have an inkling on where I may be going. But give me all the Sam Bradford this week. I love him. He's at home. He's facing an atrocious Saints defense. I was tweeting about this earlier in the week, but I am oddly all in on the Minnesota Vikings this year. I have a lot of Dalvin Cook, a lot of Stephon Diggs. I like Kyle Rudolph, I like Adam Thielen. And, in order for that all to go, they're going to need decent quarterback play. And I think Sam Bradford has a shot to be a guy that, nobody's going to play him every single week. But there is going to be opportunities and matchups, especially at home, where he can be a legit QB1 and be a reliable fantasy option, something that I know a lot of us coming into the season weren't really prepared for.
No, absolutely. I think both him and Brian Hoyer are a couple of guys that I think in a lot of my Superflex leagues, you'll see kind of, it depends on maybe the league you get in for Superflex. Maybe you'll have some players that aren't used to playing in Superflex, but generally, QB's run kind of happen pretty early, and you're just the opportunity cost of drafting two top 15 quarterbacks is very high. So my general approach has been to see if I can get a top 5, top 6 guy. I don't mind taking Rodgers or Brady early in those formats, and then essentially waiting until Bradford or Hoyer are really the only quarterbacks left, and most other teams already have their 2, so they're not taking that third because they're already a little bit behind, not having drafted running backs and receivers in the earlier rounds, and you can just grab those guys. And I'm very relatively high on them. I don't think they're going to be top 10 quarterbacks this year, but I think on a week by week basis, especially with Bradford's matchup this week, I think that's been a common theme really kind of throughout the industry this spring. I feel like I've heard in a variety of different be it podcasts or places where, this Vikings offense, they have some nice pieces. And I think Bradford kind of had a little bit of an underrated season last year where, he got criticized for really not going downfield much, but he did lead the league in completion percentage, which says something. And I think that from, a natural talent perspective, he's not Alex Smith in the sense that he can't throw the ball deep, because I definitely think, at Oklahoma and earlier in his career, we certainly saw that from him. I think it's just been a product of the systems he's been in the last couple of years and the pieces around him. But if they certainly have the talent where, if they open this offense up a little bit, I do think that there's definitely going to be some value to be had here.
100%. And, if you look at Bradford's down the field numbers, like he had an incredible completion percentage down the field. He just, between his poor offensive line play and, defenses not giving him the opportunity, he just didn't take a ton of shots. But, Stephon Diggs is a down the field kind of guy, and Kyle Rudolph can rip the middle of the field, and Adam Thielen, with Dalvin Cook back there should be more opportunity for him to kind of hang back and get some throws. If you don't have Jameis Winston this week, if you plan on Jay Cutler in deeper leagues, if you had Andrew Luck pegged up, I think Bradford's a guy that you're probably going to be able to get in almost every league. He's available in almost 80% of Yahoo leagues. Go grab him. Damian, who is your guy for your quarterback start of the week?
I'm going all in on Russell Wilson this week. I think there's a combination of factors here where the Seahawks, they're a little bit of a mess in terms of the running game right now. With Thomas Rawls being banged up, with Procise missing some of the preseason, with injuries. Lacey obviously is a guy they don't have much confidence in at this point. So I can't see them, coming up to Green Bay here and running the ball 40 times, just with all the questions surrounding that and who's going to be the lead guy there. And while their defense, the Seattle defense is obviously very strong, Aaron Rodgers puts up points wherever he goes, which is going to force the Seahawks to, put up points as well, which is why I think they're going to be throwing a lot in this game. And Green Bay's secondary was an absolute disaster last year. They should be a little bit better this year, but they were so bad that even if they improve, that's really not going to be much of an impediment to Wilson really having a big game here. So, you throw in the fact that he can give you a little something on the ground as well, especially around the goal line with those bootlegs. And he's no doubt, a top 5 quarterback for me this week. And I can easily see him outperforming Rodgers in this game just because I think the Seattle defense is so much better than Green Bay's that might kind of close the gap there.
Yeah, I love that call. I'm 100% with you. Russell Wilson was a guy that, as the offseason kind of chugged along, I got more and more excited about. His early season schedule sets up really nice, and I love him this week at Green Bay, especially in a matchup like you mentioned where Rodgers will probably put up points. So Wilson's going to have to keep up. You mentioned those running backs. Are you comfortable starting Eddie Lacy, Thomas Rawls, CJ Procise, anybody this week?
No, I'm not starting any of those guys. I don't think anybody has an idea on how that's going to work. Rawls is my favorite. He's the one I have the most shares of, but between the the injury and he's listed as a starter. I don't know what that means. Like I said, he could be out there on the first drive. If he aggravates it or anything like that, we could see Lacy. We could see Chris Carson. We'll see if he's active for this. It feels like Procise is going to be in there at least on third down, but he obviously has, I think he has the tools to be more than just a third down back. I think just based on their other running backs being more limited in that sense, that's kind of the way it's panned out. But I think if those guys struggle, we can see more of Procise on first and second down. So it's a little bit like the Patriots in the sense that I need a couple weeks to see how this is going to play out before I'm confident starting any of these guys.
Yeah, and is that how you kind of approach a lot of these ugly situations? The Cincinnati backfield, New England backfield, Seattle, when there's this many question marks and this many possible options, it's just best to kind of let the play figure it out. And even if that means missing one big game, just that way you can kind of lock and load, knowing who at least we can assume the guy is for the majority of the touches.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the risk is too high of. There's just not enough information at this point with those backfields to really feel confident in any guy. At the same time, there's also a path to each of them really having a strong week one, but those situations aren't going to be ones that I'm going to beat myself up over. As I said, it's process over results, and I think everything in the process for Seattle, for New England right now is we just don't know.
Yep.
And if depending on when you drafted, things like that. Obviously, if you drafted pretty early, then I think the outlook on guys like Lacy and Mike Gillislee, for instance, were much higher than they are right now. At least for week one, it can shift obviously as the season gets going here. But I'm not comfortable using any of them. If it's a flex position, I'm pretty certain I can find a receiver I'm going to like better. So it's just not worth the headache.
Yeah, I guess if you are dealing with a lot of a lot of Dolphins or Bucks on your team and you're scrambling, I don't mind Rawls. He's got big playability, so you could throw him out there as an RB2 if you're loaded at wide receiver. But it's a best just to kind of avoid situation. A situation I'm not gonna avoid, and I think some people might, Damian, and that's Melvin Gordon, who is my running back start of the week. Last season versus the Broncos, 27 carries, 94 yards, 23 carries, 111 yards. They're going to give him the ball. They're going to help, ease the pressure on Phil Rivers. They're not going to make him throw a ton against that secondary. That secondary that just, they just cut TJ Ward. So, their running back, their defense against the run won't be as good. I love Melvin Gordon. I know, we preach start your studs, but I think this is an opportunity. And, if I'm playing DFS, Melvin Gordon, You, you need those touchdowns, so you got to hope they can get, maybe pop one in. But I think Gordon's a really nice play this week.
I, I don't want to. I mean, I'm not going to disagree with you, but basically, in any situation I drafted Gordon, I'm going to start him. But I don't think I'd be playing. I guess in DFS, the one situation I can see is I do think his ownership percentage is going to be fairly low. So in tournaments, this could be a decent play just in terms of that angle. But I don't. I'm not. I can't dispute the volume. I do think he's going to get that. There's really nobody behind him. But in terms of the situation, I think playing at Denver is never really a situation that I feel good about. You consider the fact that the Chargers once again have some offensive line issues. Losing their first round pick or second round pick there to injury already there on the line. So I don't know if the efficiency is going to be there. But again, there's not too many running backs that you can say are going to get 25 touches week one, basically guaranteed. So I definitely think he's a safe play in terms of a floor just from the volume perspective. But I can't see really him breaking out for a huge game against this defense, even with the volume.
Yeah, I guess we'll have to disagree. I'm expecting close to 100 yards and a touchdown, so we'll see. We'll stay in that LA area. We'll talk about another running back that's going to get a ton of volume, and talk to me about your running back start of the week.
Yeah, like last season's stud is going to be a week one stud. Todd Gurley. I got a lot more Todd Gurley shares than I was expecting this year. I think it was a product of getting just a couple drafts where I was picking, in the top 3 there in the first round. So when it got back to me, at the end of the second, there just wasn't all the receivers I had wanted to take were gone, and it was basically, choosing a running back again there. And I just think, there's a couple things at play here. The fact that the Colts just look absolutely awful right now. That defense is going to be a problem regardless, but I think having to travel out to LA, I think they're going to be a little bit defeated by the Andrew Luck news. Not that, I'm sure that the guys on the team and the coaching staff there probably knew that Luck wasn't going to be ready for week one, long before that news broke, to the media and we found out. But at the same time, it's kind of tough to get, jacked up for week one of the season when Scott Tolzien is your quarterback. I just think it's hard to feel like you're going to have a pretty strong shot of winning that game. And, on the Rams side, obviously we talked about why, the coaching changes they made there and some of the personnel changes. They signed Andrew Whitworth from Cincinnati, which is a terrific lineman there.
Yep.
Which should help Gurley and the fact that they have, a competent play caller now. But I also think the fact that, even with the struggles that Indianapolis's defense has, I don't think Jared Goff is going to show up and suddenly throw for 300 yards. I think that passing game is still going to be a work in progress. Working in essentially their top 3 receivers, Watkins, Woods, and Cooper Kupp are basically they're still learning the system. It's not like those are guys that have been around there. Obviously, Kupp being a rookie and Watkins just being acquired. During the preseason, they're going to need time to basically get on the same page. So I do think it's going to be a lot of Gurley. I think this game is going to be close, where it's not a situation where third quarter and it's a blowout and we're not getting running plays anymore for the Rams. So I think we're going to see a very big workload from Gurley, and I think looking somewhere around 120 yards and potentially 2 touchdowns.
Yeah, no, I'm 100% on board. What are you more excited about? Scott Tolzien, Jared Goff, a little Tyrod Taylor, Josh McCown, or Blake Bortles versus touchdown Tommy Savage?
Can I just abstain? I think honestly, between those 3 games, they're going to get like a combined 8 minutes of airtime on Red Zone, which is the great thing about Red Zone. Yeah, I mean, you got to factor in
7 minutes
over 4 hours.
Yeah, that's true. Well, and then you got at the end where they show all the games, so maybe they'll fall into the window where there's a lot of games at half. But yeah, it'll be like it'll be like 6 minutes of Todd Gurley running and then 2 minutes of everything else.
Hopefully, that's the plan.
Let's talk about our wide receiver starts of the week. I'll let you go first, and I think this kind of ties in with your quarterback start of the week.
Yeah, I said I was all in on Russell Wilson, and that means being all in on Doug Baldwin here. we mentioned the concerns about Green Bay secondary and the fact that Seattle's going to have to throw, and when they throw it, Baldwin's way. I think he's going to be a PPR machine. With Tyler, I do like Tyler Lockett, but I think with him missing time again in the preseason, there's going to be a little bit of a rotation there behind Baldwin between Lockett and Paul Richardson. And, I just don't think there's that many options in this passing game, at least week one, that are going to see a lot of targets aside from Baldwin and Jimmy Graham. So I think, you factor all of that, and I can easily see Baldwin being, a top 5 receiver this week with a very high floor as well. I think the fact that, he's basically a lock to give you 6-7 catches, and it's just going to be a matter of, if he gets into the end zone in terms of how many points he's really going to get, and I'm pretty confident that he will. So give me all the Baldwin.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you. It's crazy. It seems like Baldwin's one of those guys that are like, for a guy that's been top 10 fantasy wide receiver 2 years in a row, like he doesn't get the credit he's due. And are you in on him from a season long perspective as much as you are for this week?
Oh, absolutely. I think if you watch him play, I mean, that's the other thing, being, him being out on the West Coast. I think, over here on the East Coast, we really don't, Seattle's usually playing at 4 o'clock. People kind of, that's
drunk and passed out by then, right?
Yeah, that's when the food coma, the hangover starts to hit. So you're kind of watching those 4 o'clock games with your eyes half shut. So you probably miss a lot of that. But I think the fact that Seattle's kind of this team we think of as being defense first, and having Marshawn Lynch for a couple of those years, we don't really give a lot of credit to their passing game, and the fact that Baldwin's obviously not a high pedigree guy in terms of being an undrafted rookie, coming out of Stanford, not having this illustrious college career, being essentially a slot receiver. But I mean, you watch him play, and he's just uncoverable. The kind of the quickness, the agility he shows, the toughness. I've heard a lot of people say he's basically the closest thing we have to Steve Smith, now that Steve Smith is no longer in the league. And obviously that the size wasn't an impediment for Steve Smith to have potentially a Hall of Fame career. So I'm not saying Baldwin's a Hall of Famer, but I think kind of given his role in this offense, and the fact that I think his skills are a lot more than his pedigree would lead you to believe, I think he's definitely going to be a top 10 receiver this season.
100%. My start of the week at wide receiver is Mr. Larry Fitzgerald. Everyone wants to put the dirt on the casket, call this guy done. I know he's older, but this week versus Detroit, sign me up. I love the Cardinals. I like Carson Palmer. I think John Brown is, he's going to be healthy. It should help open up a lot of stuff. And I expect Larry Fitzgerald to have a big, big week. So, if he's one of the guys that you're contemplating in one of your flex spots or one of your wide receiver spots, throw him in your lineup and thank me on Monday.
Send all the thank you notes.
All the thank you notes this way while I'm making all the bets and winning all the money. Let's talk tight ends. Everybody loves them. Everybody needs them. And, I'm just going to keep this tradition going as long as I can. It's all about Kobe Fleener. All the Kobe Fleener this week. All the Kobe Fleener. No Willie Snead for 3 weeks. The one game Kobe Fleener played that Willie Snead did not last year. 7 catches on 11 targets, 109 yards, touchdown. I think he has the potential to be a big thing this week. Obviously, Michael Thomas is going to get a lot of attention. The running backs are going to get a lot of attention. But I think Kobe Fleener is going to kind of fill that slot role, be a big presence when the Saints get in close. And I'm expecting 70, 80 yards and a touchdown from Mr. Fleener this week.
Nope. Just no more no more vacuum Fleeners, no more Fleener schnitzels. I've vowed.
What if he gets the handoff and vultures another touchdown?
No more Fleener sweeps. I've vowed to never again own a share of Kobe Fleener.
Dude,
for the rest of the football.
I'll fire up Madden and run like 14 to 15 Kobe Fleener sweeps a game, and I score all the points.
I don't understand why Madden would even let you do that. I joked with Evan Silva on Twitter the other day. He responded to something saying
NBD.
How name drop.
Yeah.
I know we were saying, Finder said, look at all the increased opportunity, increased targets for Fleener in Snead's absence, and I was like, that translates to just increased drop passes and more poorly run routes from Kobe Fleener. I think his his low light tape, if you will, of him just falling over and running into things and looking confused is going to be 2 minutes longer now. But I don't think his production is really going to improve much.
Yeah, start calling him General Confusion. General Confusion.
So many of them favorable.
Talk to me about your tight end start of the week, because I like this one quite a bit.
Yeah, I'm going with Charles Clay here, and I think he's a guy that with the exception of something like the Scott Fish Bowl, he's available in the vast majority of leagues, because I don't really think anybody has him as a top 12, even a top 15 tight end going into the year, with kind of the weird moves that have been coming out of Buffalo. I don't think anybody's particularly high on that offense as a whole. That said, there's really not much there in the passing game right now. I think when you look at it, Jordan Matthews hasn't really done anything since being traded there, just on account of that chest injury. So I don't see how he's going to have much of a rapport with Tyrod Taylor at this point.
Well, if you talk to Ronald, you might have missed it, but Ronald called Zay Jones a top 20 or 25 fantasy wide receiver this weekend in this season in PPR.
I mean, that's definitely a Ronald take. I guess, I mean, I can see that. I don't know. Maybe I'm gonna be pushing it. I think I'm trying to talk myself into it here. Which, I mean, look, I love Zay Jones. I think he's a talented guy. He obviously was an extremely productive player in college, and he's looked really good in the preseason. But I don't think he's gonna come out in week one like that, just because he hasn't really had that time with Taylor missing time with the concussion and stuff. I think if, Nathan Peterman was the quarterback here in week one, I'd feel better about Jones, actually, just with kind of, how much time those guys have had this preseason together. So I do think there's going to be somewhat of a learning curve here in terms of before they get on the same page. So I think I'm more excited about him in season long than I would be for week one. But I think Clay is, the constant here in terms of he's a guy that's been there. He's obviously comfortable with Taylor. Now he's again in season long, it's risky because he is a guy with a pretty extensive injury history. But he appears to be good to go for week one. I think the Jets, are a dumpster fire pretty much in every facet, on every level: offense, defense, special teams, coaching, front office. I mean, I don't know. They might even have bad cheerleaders at this point, since everything else seems to be failing there. So I just, not that this is going to be, an offensive bonanza of any sorts, but I do think that in that check down role, with neither team really being able to generate a lot of explosive plays, I think Clay is a guy that, we can see come away with, 5, 6, 7, even 8 catches maybe for, 70, 80 yards with the potential to get into the end zone.
Yeah, I mean, he's available in over 90% of Yahoo leagues. If you had planned on starting Jack Doyle, if you'd planned on starting Cameron Brate, if you had planned on starting kind of some of those middling guys, I think he's a great alternative and widely available, like Damian said, and head out, grab him, and get him in your lineup. Now it's time to bring in the negative portion of our podcast and talk about those players that you should be sitting. In a lot of these cases, we're going to hopefully give you some names in the sit category that you can put in, or sit category that you'll be putting on your bench, and hopefully some of the players that are either available or sitting on your bench that we recommend can kind of jump in and we can help you win some weeks. So let's talk some quarterbacks, and let's talk about Mr. Matthew Stafford at home versus Arizona. Talk to me about this one.
Yeah, so I mean, when we're kind of doing this sit thing, I'm not going to tell you to sit, the 23rd ranked quarterback this week. I don't think that's really very useful advice. So we kind of, I was trying to go with somebody who's at least in the top 12, 13 or so. And my concern with Stafford is just, I think in this matchup against a really strong Arizona defense, Patrick Peterson, Tyrann Mathieu, a lot of playmakers there. And the Lions don't have that clear-cut number one receiver that is essentially, matchup proof like they did when Calvin Johnson was still there. So I see a lot of, kind of short passing plays here, the stuff to Theo Riddick, to Golden Tate, and just kind of it could be a case where Stafford, can throw the ball 45 times, but it's for like 225 yards. And I don't see the explosive plays there. I don't know how many points they're going to be able to put up here, especially if they can't get the ground game going, which, is still kind of a work in progress. We'll see how that shapes out. I do like Abdullah for the long term, but I just don't know how effective they're going to be in this matchup. So I don't see the upside for him, and Stafford kind of has a pretty long history of kind of letting us down in decent looking matchups. Not that this is that, but if he can do that even in favorable situations, I'm certainly not picking him as a guy that I expect to overcome a more difficult environment here.
Yeah, are you starting Carson Palmer, who will face him in this matchup, over Matthew Stafford?
I am. I don't feel great about Palmer, but I think the difference in these two defenses and the fact that one of them, has David Johnson is definitely going to make life a lot easier for Palmer, at least, relative to Stafford here.
What about Bradford?
Yeah, I'd actually, I could see myself making that.
Let's do
that
it.
move. And
let's do it.
I don't think you should be dropping Stafford for Bradford.
No.
But if Bradford is on your waiver wire and you can find a way to pull him up, I do think that that Vikings offense is going to be able to move the ball a little bit better than Detroit this week.
Yeah, and it depends on your waiver wire. If there's a lot of the Carson Wentz, Dak Prescott, Eli Manning type quarterbacks out there, I'm fine dropping him. Matthew Stafford's one of those guys that he's going to have a handful of games that are going to be amazing, and at the end of the season his numbers are going to look really good, but there's also going to be a lot of weeks where he's not even really a top 10, top 12 type guy, and it's going to be really frustrating as a fantasy owner. So I'm fine dropping him if you know you can pick up somebody else, but yeah, I'm playing Palmer for sure, and I'm playing Bradford for sure. Let's talk about my quarterback sit of the week, and it kind of ties into my running back start, and that's Mr. Phil Rivers. I like the Chargers offense from a season-long perspective, but their first 7 games are really brutal. I think this is going to be a pound the ball with Melvin Gordon game. I still think the Broncos defense is one of among the best. Rivers tends to play better at home again in this matchup. This one in Mile High, I don't see it ending well. I think he'll be okay, but he's another one of those guys. I'm playing Carson Palmer over him. I'm playing Sam Bradford over him, and I'm not really thinking twice.
Totally agree. I think Rodgers, Brady, Breeze are really, maybe Matt Ryan, the only guys that I'll start in Denver and not really make a concerted effort to find an alternative option there. But anybody else, just like I said, you don't want to be starting week 1 going uphill, and that's exactly what playing at Denver is for most quarterbacks, including Phil Rivers.
Yep, totally. I'm glad we're on the same page there. Let's talk about our running back sits, and I'm gonna start here. And that's Mr. Leonard Fournette. Everyone is all over Leonard Fournette, 2nd, 3rd round pick. There's no chance I'm using him this week. On the road at Houston, Blake Bortles is still his quarterback. Blake Bortles' last 3 games in Houston, 117 yards, no touchdowns, no picks. 239 yards, no touchdowns, 2 picks. Last game, 92 yards, one pick. He scares me. I feel like there's, even as much as we want to make fun of the Texans offense, I feel like this is going to be a negative game script. I feel like J.J. Watt, after making $20 million for the city of Houston, is going to be just out there murking people. Like, I feel like we could see 2 or 3 quarterbacks from the Jags this week. Maybe Allen Hurns gets back there. I don't know. It just feels like a recipe for disaster. And, I think Fournette probably gets 15-ish touches. Doesn't get very far, and really disappoints his fantasy owners. If you're looking for a sneaky play in deeper leagues, in the PPR leagues, I don't hate TJ Yeldon. I could see it being checked down city, but what do you think about that Fournette call?
Hey, who knows? Maybe Allen Hurns at quarterback would be an upgrade for the Jaguars at this point. So, not the craziest thing, but no. Look, those are all good points. I don't own any Fournette this year. that was mostly intentional. I just never understood the price on him, given that I don't
Yeah.
think he's going to catch a lot of passes, and I don't think this offense is going to move the ball very well.
Yeah, you're in
So he's
the
not
you're
going
in
to
the
have.
back you're in the back of the second, and you can pick Doug Baldwin or Leonard Fournette. Like, are you joking me?
Right, and what was weird is that I think with a lot of the questions about some of the other rookie running backs, people saying, okay, well, at least we know Fournette's the goal line guy, and McCaffrey isn't, and Joe Mixon isn't, and Dalvin Cook might not be. I'm like, yeah, but how many goal line opportunities is Fournette going to get? I mean,
Hmm.
Chris Ivory was the goal line guy. I don't remember him scoring, 12 touchdowns. So it was just bizarre. And this is gonna be an ugly game.
Yeah.
The Houston defense is obviously terrific. Trying to get to see Watt and Clowney together. They have good players on all three levels there, and Bortles is a disaster. Like you said, even if Fournette gets 18 touches here, it could be for 40 45 yards. I don't think unless there's kind of like a big pass interference play that gets him to the 1 yard line or something, and Fournette can get in. I don't think there's really much upside for him to do a lot in this matchup, and the downside is the fact that they just don't move the ball, and
Yeah.
if that's the case, it's going to be tough for him to be an RB2.
Yeah, you really need him to score a touchdown in order for him to have value. It's going to be rough otherwise. Talk to me about your running back sit.
Yeah, so I'm going with Marshawn Lynch. Another guy that I didn't really get any shares of, and just maybe as the season goes on, he'll kind of prove a lot of us wrong, and he'll be closer to the Marshawn Lynch that we saw earlier in his Seattle years. But taking a whole year off of football, I don't see him coming into Week 1 and all of a sudden getting 20 touches. I think that we're going to see a lot of Jalen Richard and DeAndre Washington
Hmm.
here, whether it's in the pass game or on third down, maybe on some draws, some sweeps, stuff like that. Getting him out in space, I do think Lynch is going to be the guy they're going to use in the red zone possibly, at least if they're running it there. And Oakland should move the ball. I do think there's obviously going to be at least more chances for him here than say for Fournette, who we just talked about.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I just with the lack of volume and him not being really a guy that I see breaking off a 60-yard run at this point in his career, I just don't think it makes a lot of sense. Obviously it depends on kind of what other options you have, but I'm certainly not viewing him, as a third or fourth round pick in this matchup, which is kind of where we had him going in draft. So, I'd start Terrence West over him
Hmm.
to give you kind of an idea of, um, you know, where I'm at with that. But yeah, I guess it depends on your team, but I'm certainly not going to be having a lot of Lynch in any of. Well, I don't have him in any of my teams, but I certainly won't be having any DFS shares either this week.
Yeah, he's definitely not in the start your studs category, and I'm 100% with you. If the Titans run the ball a ton, there's not going to be a lot of possessions for the Raiders, which I could see them doing. That aerial attack and a weak secondary the Titans have. But yeah, no, I'm with you. I own zero Lynch, and I think a lot of people are expecting him to kind of do what Latavius did last year. And I don't see it. This guy hasn't played in a year and a half, and they're gonna work him in at least for the first couple of games. I would expect 10 to 15 touches. I mean, maybe if they get up a lot, then they give him a couple extra. But at the same time, they're probably going to rest him because this is a team that kind of thinks of themselves as a pseudo Super Bowl team, and they want to make sure he's healthy for the end, not for the beginning. So I'm 100% with you. Let's talk some wide receivers that we're going to sit, and let's go back to Houston and talk about DeAndre Hopkins, who is a guy a lot of people drafted, a guy a lot of people are in on. You see the secondary of Jacksonville, obviously holes there. Why are you starting? Why are you sitting DeAndre Hopkins?
It's a lot of the we talked about Fournette in terms of his situation. It's similar with Hopkins for me in terms of I haven't seen any reason to believe that Tom Savage is much of an upgrade over Brock Osweiler. Now I do think he's going to be better, but I don't think he's going to be as productive as Brian Hoyer was. I think that's what a lot of people might be assuming that we're going to get the DeAndre Hopkins we saw with Hoyer 2 years ago, and I don't necessarily see that as the case. Maybe in certain matchups but not against the Jaguars, who I think are going to have a really good defense this year. With Jalen Ramsey back, they're coming off a terrific rookie season, and a lot of the free agent signings they made over the last 2 seasons, bringing in a lot of talent on that D line. I think both teams are going to struggle to move the ball here, and I easily see this being a 16-13 game, something along those lines. And Hopkins giving you 4 for 55, which obviously is not what you're hoping for a receiver you drafted to be your number 1 or number 2 guy this year. So I do think there'll be better days ahead, but I don't expect him to make a lot of noise in week 1.
Yeah, I'm gonna probably disagree with you there. I think. Like, I don't expect him. Like, he's definitely not a must play. Like, he's not a guy that I'm figuring out how to get in my lineup everywhere. But I'm pretty optimistic about him. I think the emergence of the Jacksonville defense has been overstated a while. I do think they'll run the ball a lot. I don't think he's going to have a monster, 10 catch, 200 yard type game. But I think 5, 6, 7 catches, maybe 70, 80 yards, and a good possibility to touchdown is definitely in the cards. And I'm very comfortable throwing him out there. The guy that I am going to avoid this week, though, and it all depends. All these are relative, right? Don't start, don't start Nelson Aguilar. Don't start Cecil Shorts. Don't start D.D. Westbrook just because we're saying sit these guys. But if you have better options, definitely consider them. And the guy that I'm trying to put on my bench is Alshon Jeffrey. I like him a lot from a season-long perspective. I think there's big things to come. But this week, he gets the Washington Redskins, and he gets Josh Norman. And I know Norman wasn't great last year, but last year, comes from our dude Alex Gelhar over at NFL.com. Carson Wentz only targeted a wide receiver covered by Norman once in 2 games in 2016. So, last year he threw it one time in two full games. When the Bears played Norman, Jeffrey had 4 for 78 on 9 targets. So, a fine game, but nothing crazy. It feels like if you have better alternatives, I'm definitely looking to do that. I don't know. I can't pencil him in knowing that Norman's going to be there, knowing that Wentz is going to be there, and expecting to, get a strong performance.
Yeah, I can definitely see that happening here, and I'm really high on Ertz this week. I think that with Jordan Matthews being gone, the Ertz being kind of the main guy that Wentz has a rapport with. We're going to see a lot of targets for him over the middle of the field, and maybe Wentz is a little bit more comfortable than he was as a rookie in terms of confidence in the offense and in his own skill set now to maybe challenge Norman a little bit more than he did last year. That said, this is still Alshon's first year with the team. It's going to take some time for them to get on the same page. So I totally agree with you that I don't think in terms of I think this is probably going to be one of his tougher matchups this year. Again, depending on where you drafted him and how deep your league is, chances are you might have to play him. But I'm certainly not expecting a ton from him.
Yeah, one of our viewers, Romeo, points out a good point that what are your thoughts on Alshon? Because health has always been a concern with him. He's got a 1-year deal. I guess if you own him, we're in a point where you got to play him while he's available. Can we expect if I set the over under at 12.5 games, you taking the over, or taking the under?
I'm gonna take the over, but I don't feel great about it. I think being on a 1-year deal, maybe, and it's not to say he wasn't motivated to play through injuries or anything, but obviously there's incentive for him to try to put together a really strong season here to get a nice deal next year. So, we'll see. I do think as a whole, I don't think as much as we kind of joke about Cutler and stuff like that. I think as a whole, the situation isn't as good for him as it was in Chicago per se. So I guess on the plus side is the fact that there really aren't very many other weapons aside from Ertz in this offense. So in terms of market share, we could see Jeffrey get a lot of targets, especially in the red zone. So it'll be interesting to see how it develops. I think I'm not viewing him the way I did in earlier years where he's a solid number 2. I think he's more of a low end number 2, a great number 3 maybe this season. But again, you do have to factor in that injury risk, and he's not a guy that you're going to want to have on your team if you have a lot of other receivers that have a history of missing games with injuries, because then you end up at a point where half your team's on IR.
Yeah, I'm a little higher. I'm gonna go over. I think it kind of got really salty there in Chicago and things just got bad. But I do like him. I think there's potential, and if Carson Wentz is throwing near 600 times like he did last year, I think there's good stuff to come. We have another question from our chat. If you are with us, make sure you're asking us questions. We're always here to help. Who do you like better for Week 1? Pierre Garçon at home versus Carolina, or Davante Adams at home versus Seattle?
That's a close one for me. I think that if you're in a PPR format, even half-point PPR, I'm leaning Garçon right now. It's a floor upside situation here. Obviously, with even playing Seattle, but having Aaron Rodgers and being in that Packers system, I think it's far more likely that Davante Adams gives us 80 yards and a touchdown, maybe even 2 touchdowns, depending on how they play in the red zone and if they kind of shift coverage towards Jordy. I don't see Garçon having a huge game, but I do think that if we look at what Kyle Shanahan has done in the past with kind of the number one receiver in that offense, and even what we saw from Garçon in the preseason, I think 7 for 75, something like that, is totally a fair projection for him. So even without a touchdown, he's a guy that in those formats he can get you 12, 13 points. Which if you have some boomer bust guys in your lineup, I think that's a good way to play it. But for instance, if you have Larry Fitzgerald, who I think obviously he's your start of the week, but for me he's kind of the epitome of a high floor guy who at this point in his career just doesn't have the 150-yard game in him anymore. I think if you already have a Larry Fitzgerald, then you can take a shot on Davante Adams and hoping that he gets into the end zone here. Whereas if you're dealing with a more volatile receiver like Alshon Jeffrey, who we just talked about, I'd want at least one of my guys at that position to have that floor, and I think Garçon gives you that.
Yeah, it's Garçon for me, no matter the format. I cannot stand Davante Adams. I don't get the hype, and if you checked out our bold call segment, I said Davante Adams will not be a top 30 or top 40 wide receiver this year. Like, I think he is trash. I think he's going to have a really bad season, and I think he's going to really frustrate a lot of owners. But,
well, okay, but what makes you think that what we saw from him last year isn't going to be repeatable to a large extent now?
Why does one season make a player? Like, he's played in the league 3 years. He has 4 touchdowns in 2 seasons before last year. He basically took his 2 years worth of production and combined it into 1 year. I also think Randall Cobb is much better. I think Randall Cobb is a guy that had 125, 130 targets the previous 2 seasons, and that dropped to 80 last year. And I think Cobb is healthy. I think he'll be back, and I think Rodgers trusts him more. I think it was a point where Cobb was out and Jordy was getting all the attention, and now Davante Adams is wide open. I think Martellus Bennett being there affects that. I think Ty Montgomery being there affects it. I don't see the volume being there for him to be a guy that gets close to 1,000 yards and double-digit touchdowns. I have him for 700 yards and 6 or 7 touchdowns, which is whatever. But for a guy that was going in the top 3-4 rounds, there's no way I was paying that price.
Yeah, I mean, okay, I can see that. I think if we're looking at his career production here, I think you have to. I mean, his rookie season, given kind of that he was the 3rd, 4th receiver on that team, I think, given the expectations there, that was totally fine. I don't think that's a mark against him. I think he even exceeded maybe what we thought he was going to give us as a rookie. And then, that second year was a disaster. I think when, Jody got hurt, and we assumed that he was basically going to step in and be this great receiver. And obviously that wasn't him. And I think, I guess maybe if we're saying that this year is going to be somewhere in between the last 2 seasons, like you said, it will depend on how many targets get taken away by Bennett and by Montgomery. But I just think if he was in a different offense, I'm not saying Davante Adams is a great player, but I think his lack of efficiency gets masked by the fact that he's just going to get more red zone opportunities, more just opportunities in general, with with great throws coming from Aaron Rodgers than somebody like Allen Robinson, for instance, is going to get. Even though obviously I think Robinson is a superior player.
Could you imagine Aaron Rodgers throwing passes to Allen Robinson? Like,
Oh, only in your dreams. But hey, while we're still on receivers, I know we have a couple more questions coming in here.
Sure.
From Romeo Ramirez, he wanted to know, we were kind of talking about receivers switching teams. He was asking if historically, we've seen receivers go to a new team and basically improve. I think so much of that is dependent on, on context. For instance, I think the thing that came to mind for me right away was, Wes Welker went from being like a practice squad guy to catching 120 passes a game on the Patriots.
Yeah.
So I don't think that's applicable to any situation this year in terms of, a situation like that, or even staying with the Patriots, seeing Randy Moss go from being basically on the verge of retirement with the Raiders to breaking the single season touchdown record. So I don't think any receiver is in a situation like that this year, where they basically went from being in a poor offensive situation, going to join somebody like Tom Brady or Aaron Rodgers or Drew Brees. I guess if we want to just kind of look at it in receivers in new places, I think a couple of the guys that I think are coming to mind right now, if we're looking at this year, Terrell Pryor going to the Redskins, kind of being one of the bigger names there. Brandon Marshall to the Giants, maybe.
Yeah. Just to go from the mess that was the Jets to the Giants, I think it is a big uptick. I like Ted Ginn a lot. I think going to New Orleans, a place where he's going to be able to run indoors a lot, take a lot deep shots. I trust Drew Brees to be able to find him. I know he's not a guy that tends to catch all of his targets, but I think his catch percentage could go up a little bit with more accurate passes, and he's going to get probably north of 100 targets. So he's another guy that I think it really is quarterback dependent, offense dependent, and kind of when they make that shift, then they it kind of ends up working out or not working out.
Yeah. And like I said, I think so much of it kind of depends on that context. So you can go so many different ways with it, but it's trying to basically balance. With somebody like Marshall, I guess the fact that you have to factor in, does he still kind of have what we saw from him in years past, given his age, and the fact that I don't know if the Giants are going to have time to throw the ball at all. I'm really worried about that offensive line situation. I don't want to say I'm like downgrading Beckham already, but they've just looked so bad that if it's like the Sam Bradford thing from last year where they can't throw anything more than 3-step drops, that's obviously going to be a disaster. So
they
we'll
were
see.
a mess last year. I don't know. I think Odell will be fine. I still take him as the number 2.
Yeah. We don't want to. Like I said, I don't want to. It's not. Maybe it might not be actionable, but no, I'm with you on Ginn. I think the Saints, just looking through the years, they've always had that guy. Whether it was Robert Meacham or Devery Henderson, just their deep threat guy who, isn't consistent week to week, but I think in terms of like pure talent, I think Ginn actually, from what we've seen, obviously a big disappointment earlier in his career, but I think just as a deep threat, I think he's going to be better in that role than either of those two guys were. And then just staying with Romeo here, he had one more question that we can get to regarding Dynasty. He was asking, if you got a stash in Dynasty, you want Kenny Golladay, Trent Taylor, or Tywan Taylor. What are your thoughts on those three, Kyle?
They're all really interesting names, guys I really like. Golladay obviously is the bigger guy, the guy that kind of profiles better as that number one guy. But Tywan Taylor is a real interesting to me. Obviously, I don't want to be too much of a homer, but a young receiver that could pair nicely with Corey Davis in an offense that's developing, and a Mariota quarterback that's they're going to do some quick plays. They're going to find unique ways to get him the ball. I think Taylor could be interesting. Obviously, if you're looking for someone who could potentially help you this year, I think Golladay is the correct answer. But if I'm looking for, from a dynasty lens, or I'm looking for the next couple of years, I think Taylor might be my guy. Tywan Taylor, not Trent Taylor.
It's Golladay for me, both in short term and long term. and it's not that close. The reason being, I just think you touched on it. I think he has the build of a number one receiver that can play on the outside. I know JJ Zachariason over at Number Fire has dubbed him Minitron, as basically the Calvin Johnson replacement, or Babytron. There was one more too. He had another great nickname between those two, but I mean, I don't. We're not gonna. That's crazy talk at this point in his career. Obviously, Galladay hasn't played a single game in the NFL. But I think just given what they have on that team right now, I can certainly see him ascending to essentially being their primary receiver. Not necessarily this year, but being a red zone guy this year. And then hopefully, in a year, hopefully in year 3, being their future number one. The other two guys there, I think, I'm with you on Taiwan. I think the concern there is with them drafting Corey Davis. That's obviously the guy they want to build their passing game around. And given how strong that offensive line and running game is with both Murray and Henry, I just don't think that's going to be a passing game that's going to have volume to sustain that many options when you consider that, they already have a great tight end in Walker. They signed Decker. So I just don't think the volume is going to be there in the short term, maybe a few years down the road, but it's tough to go that far ahead. And, Trent Taylor, he's a guy that I love. I mean, I don't want to. Obviously, the stereotype is going to be, he's a short, small slot wide receiver. He's Wes Welker, Cole Beasley, and but I mean, he is like it's. You don't want to go too far the other way and say, well, I'm not going to compare him to those guys just because it seems lazy. It may seem lazy, but if you watch him play in college, I mean, that's exactly what he is. He put up huge numbers at Louisiana Tech there with Carlos Henderson. There's quite the 1-2 punch, but. I think he, the ceiling here, at least in the short term, is you think he could be have the Jamison Crowder role for San Francisco as that slot guy, and I think that's a valuable, a valuable role. But I don't think that at least with the offense as it currently is with Brian Hoyer, I just don't think they're going to have the volume to basically sustain a slot receiver. As somebody that you can use in 12, 14 team leagues at least this year. But I do think that if he does have that role to himself, he's certainly on par with somebody like Cooper Kupp for me. I think I actually like Hoyer more than I like Goff, so I can certainly see him outperforming Kupp this year. But I think he's a guy that's not on a lot of people's radars right now. That if your bench is deep enough, if it's a full dynasty where you're keeping your whole roster and you have 25, 30 spots maybe, he's certainly a guy that I can see a future where he's catching 65, 70 passes for 800 yards with a couple touchdowns every year. So certainly somebody to keep on your radar.
100%. Let's talk about our tight ends that we're avoiding this week, and I'll let you go first. If you're looking at a tight end you want to avoid, who are you looking at?
It's out of the top 10, 12 guys for me, it's Eifert, and it's just because I think with him already missing much of the preseason, not necessarily being hurt already, but just as a precaution because the guy's essentially made of glass. I just think this is a really tough matchup. The Ravens have a great defense. This is the team that he had that gruesome elbow injury against, I believe, 2 years ago. In the first game, ended up missing the season. So I'm not saying he's going to get hurt again, but if he can't get a touchdown, I just don't see much production from him. Maybe you get 3 for 40 or 4 for 45, but for a top 8 tight end, I think you're expecting more than that.
Yeah, he really is super touchdown dependent, and when you can produce 13 touchdowns in 13 games, it's amazing, but it's just very hard to expect. I'm going to go with Hunter Henry. I still think Gates will be a factor for the first couple games. They're obviously facing that tough Denver defense. I don't like Phillip Rivers. I think they're going to run a lot, so I'm looking elsewhere for tight ends. I think Charles Clay over both these guys isn't the worst thing. Obviously, if you're looking for that touchdown or bust, Eifert would be a better play. PPR, I might look at Clay. Obviously, I like Kobe Fleener. I like both, him over Hunter Henry as well. So, that's just a couple names. All right,
yep.
Damien. I want to once again thank our sponsor, Draft. Today is the last day. Playdraft.com/fakepigskin. Download the app and put in promo code fakepigskin. Deposit $5. get a year of our fake pigskin elite service, an extra $3 ticket for this upcoming weekend, and have a lot of fun on Play Draft. But Damian, we are going to be watching actual NFL football that counts this time tomorrow. Your Pats, Kansas City, should be a lot of fun, and I'm definitely looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's gonna be it's gonna be awesome to have football back. I'm obviously gonna be all in on that game. Gonna be a good time. But yeah, like you said, get on Play Draft. Now get on our YouTube channel now, especially as we're getting off the ground. As you just saw, it's a little bit easier for us to answer questions, kind of as we're building up that fan base. So if you have stuff, you'll throw it in the chat. We'll get to it live, which obviously is going to have some value to it because, like I said, with a lot of kind of the bigger sites, bigger stuff. When they have 1,000 people tweeting at them, it's going to be very hard for them to get back to the majority of them. So at least we have that on our side right now.
100%. We are here answering questions at FPAOP on Twitter. Don't hesitate to ask. Damian will be back on Monday to join me to recap all the madness. If you have start-sit questions, if you have, you're trying to figure out what to do with Mike Evans out, or you need a quarterback, let us know. I'm at Notorious KRO. Damian, tell everybody where they can find you.
At D_bro1389.
Send us questions. Slide up in those DMs. We're always here to help, and really appreciate you checking out the show. But for Damian Dabrowski, I'm Kyle Robert, and we'll talk to you guys on Monday.